there, everybody. This is going to be a little different for me in the sense that I am not exactly sure how this works. I'm going to try to share, and I'm going to try to make things make things work for you. I want to know first if you can all see me in the little, if you can see me in the little window. Well, you can now. Did everybody else know to put?
Yep.
To activate me. Okay.
We've got thumbs up.
Okay, I'm gonna move right on. I'm not gonna do all my introduction like what is the Honey and Pollination Center. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. Some of you know who I am. I've been involved in the world of honey since the 1970s. So it's been a very, very long time. I have not been a beekeeper all that time, though I have bees in my backyard now, and my son and I keep them together. And my daughter actually takes care of them when she comes to visit, and she's an apprentice level beekeeper. So I started out just cooking with honey, like a lot of other people after college in the 70s. We're all sort of into the nature route. And then I ended up getting involved with a man who had he'd been keeping bees for a bunch of years in Israel and was starting a small honey business in California called Moonshine Trading. And I came and joined him eventually in 1981. And that business is still going. It's called Z Specialty Food. And we started as a varietal honey business, which no one had varietal honeys to speak of at the time. There was a handful from a place called Honey Acres and a handful from Rita Miller's. And other than that, nobody was much into it. Honey was sort of considered honey. So the question really is for you guys, what is honey? Now, according to the National Honey Board, the honey is a substance made when nectar and sweet deposits from plants are gathered, modified, and stored in the honeycomb by honeybees. And amazingly, all honey, no matter where it's come from, no matter how much it's been heated or pasteurized or filtered or anything else, all honey is considered natural. This past fall, we finally got an identity for honey. It has not been fully accepted at this point. The United States does not have a product identity on honey, so we're just starting that. Now, a couple things are interesting about this one. If you read through it, it says that honey is a sweet syrupy substance produced by honeybees from the nectar of plants or from the secretions of living parts of plants or excretions of plant-sucking insects. That includes honeydew. Some of you probably produce honeydew, and it's the aphids that kind of excrete it and do the process they're talking about are farmed by ants. It's something you really need to do a little bit of research about to learn, because there's things you need to talk about to people. And we'll go on and talk a little bit more about things you need to know. But honeydew is an interesting one. What this is excluding by error, because there's other places in these kinds of US rules and regulations that it shows up, is no honey from Melipona bees. Now, Melipona are the tropical bees that occur all over the world, actually. There's many, many, many kinds of Melipona. And the ones that we're most familiar with and the very high moisture content honey they produce are generally from the Yucatan. So you're gonna hear about that over time. For those of you who travel or do different things, pick up different honeys, you may find Melipona honey, and it's actually collected often with a syringe because there's so little produced at a time. So one of the other things you sort of need to know is the composition of honey. Now, these two pieces that you're looking at on the top are one's from Food and Cooking by Harold McGee. That's the simpler one. It's the one we can all understand. And then the other one is from the gargantuan book. I don't know if any of you own it. It's a big tome. Got about several thousand pages, by Eva Crane, and it was written in the 1970s. And this book is still the seminal book on honey. There has been nothing really written in depth since then. She does all these chemical analyses. She does all the sugar analysis. She does everything. It's a compilation of a bunch of different people working together, but the book is amazing. And if you're on campus, once the library is open. If you're on campus, you can go on up to the honey section and get a copy of it just to start to look at. It's pretty amazing. You can also try to buy one online. They cost about, they can cost anywhere from $200 to $800, depending, because it's out of print. I'm hopeful it'll come back into print sometime soon. The little thing you're seeing down below is nutrition facts. And right now, these are changing. This is always one of the things I love to talk about because it drives me crazy. It's like, you know, here I am in the world of honey, and sometimes things are just going along great, and sometimes decisions are made that are enough to make you want to hit your head on the wall. And this particular decision that was made in 2000 started, it's coming out, and it has to do with the way all nutrition facts are looked at right now, because people are mostly concerned about added sugar. Now, honey is a sugar. It's not an added sugar. So when you look at it, you're just looking at honey. However, if you look at this little thing, the nutrition facts, you'll notice that it says total carbohydrates are 17 grams, which is 6% of your daily allotted amount. And then the sugars are 16 grams of that carbohydrate. The new ruling, which is not yet in effect, and which all the beekeepers and maple syrup people and agave syrup people in the world are hoping will go away, underneath the sugars, it says added sugars. And then it has 16 grams again. Then on the bottom of this whole label, what you see here is a very small reduced label. It actually says total sugar, 32 grams. But the fact is, it's only 16. So it's very serious disinformation that the National Honey Board, the American Beekeeping Federation, and a lot of other organizations are trying to rid the world of as soon as we can. However, when I talk to groups like you, and this is my first time actually trying to teach people who ideally will go out and run a course on, or a tasting professionally, or not, you know, in a way that other people can learn from you. These are important things to know, because people will ask you these questions. You need to know your moisture content, in particular, average moisture being about 17%. When it's nectar, it starts at 80%. And you need to know the process that gets it down to that 17%, which we'll talk about towards the end of this if we have time. So a lot of people ask that question, like, how does honey become honey? They, you know, they're in their head, they're thinking, well, the bees collect honey, right? But no, bees collect nectar. And that's a process that eventually becomes honey. It's actually pretty quick, but it doesn't just go from nectar to honey in a heartbeat. And that's what people don't understand. They don't understand that there is a real process there. So questions vary. What I've learned over time is that the more you know, the more people appreciate hearing it. My kids always used to tell me, TMI, Mom, too much information. But the fact is, most people want too much information. They will keep asking you question after question after question. So one of the other important things to know is about how much honey Americans eat. When I started in this industry in 1981, Americans were eating less than half a pound of honey a year. And you can see on the graph on the top, in 1990, Americans were eating about a pound of honey per year, per person. So that means it includes infants, it includes people who don't eat any honey at all. It includes any and everybody in the United States. So the average consumption per person is now about 1.7 or 1.8 pounds per person. Now, one of the other things that was going on is there's a little history here that most people don't know. When I first got into the honey industry in 1980s, beekeepers were predominantly making money from the sale of honey. They weren't making a lot of money, but they were making money. That's where their income came from. Most beekeepers always kept bees because they loved it. There were always families of beekeepers, which there still are. Somewhere in the early 1990s, people began to realize they could make money from, I mean, they always did some pollination, but now they could actually really make real money, particularly going into the almonds. So they started putting all their bees in the almonds, and the bulk of their income was coming from pollination. And that kind of went along in tandem. So there was a little bit of honey, but a lot of pollination, and that's going along and going along. And then about 2010, probably about the time that colony collapse disorder started hitting, beekeepers all of a sudden found that they needed to make, again, they needed to make more money because the colony collapse, the loss of queens, equipment, different things that had to be taken care of was costing too much. They couldn't make up the money in the orchards, so they started selling honey again more actively and trying to produce honey and produce good honey, varietal honeys. So what you're seeing in the bottom graph is the income that was coming to beekeepers along the way. And you can see that in 2017, they're making a fair amount of money per pound. They're making over $2, and that's at wholesale, you know, dirty honey in a barrel. They're making a nice chunk of change, and they're feeling pretty good because that's supplementing their losses when they go to do pollination, which is now our entire farming system has become dependent upon. But take a look at 2019, and what you're seeing is, and it's still ongoing, is the fact that honey is no longer high priced. And what's happened is, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, is that even though beekeepers are producing top quality bees, and I use white clover there where you're seeing it's $1, they're getting $1.55 a pound when 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they were getting close to $2.50 a pound. Argentina imports are at $1.15 a pound. Other adulterated honeys are even lower, and our beekeepers are no longer making enough money to stay in business. This is a serious issue for our farming community. It's a serious issue for what's going on in our whole world in terms of food. Some of this has to do with adulteration, and some of this simply has to do with the fact that Argentina in particular had a glut of honey that they wanted to sell, so they just sold it cheap. And our beekeepers are paying the price. So if you talk to beekeepers or people, I always try to encourage people to charge a really fair price for their honey. It isn't uncommon to get at least $10 a pound or more. And the more we charge and you are selling good quality honey, the more people are actually willing to pay for it. And we want people to know that there's good honey out there that's worth more than they can necessarily purchase it for at Target. So the other thing, and we'll be going into this is what this is really all about, is what's a monofloral honey. Maybe this is a good point to stop in case there's any questions, because this sort of is a shifting, Wendy. So did you get any questions yet?
Sure. We've just been commiserating in the chat about how we totally blow the stat of a pound a year per person out of the, you know, we're consuming 2 and 3 pounds a week in some cases. So, yeah.
I know this one.
Yeah. Other than that, there are no other questions in the chat right at this moment. So
Okay.
Thank you for checking in.
Yeah, because we'll move over to the monofloral part right now. So one of the things that people, when you're collecting honey, when your bees are out there, in general, they're collecting a wildflower, a multi-floral source honey. That's in general. And you have to work at creating a monofloral. I didn't write down all the details, but this is probably the single most common question I answer when I'm at a food show or presenting in almost any environment. How do you know that it is a monofloral honey? There's a couple of reasons, and it all actually starts at the beekeeper level. There are scientific reasons too, but starting at the beekeeper level, let's say you guys are all are hobbyist beekeepers in most cases. However, if you're doing a tasting, you're not going to only just taste your own honey. If you do, you're not doing a service of education. You want to taste a variety, and you want to know that your floral sources are pure. So this is a very, very pure orange blossom honey. It comes from Southern California. This is a Northern California wildflower. And this one with the green label, and I don't know how many of you bought the honeys to taste, but I'm going to use these. The one with the green label is a seed crop from Yuba City, and it's coriander honey. And one of the things that's interesting about it is that it's a savory honey, and we'll talk about that as we go through. But a monofloral honey, traditionally what happens is the beekeeper will move their colonies into an area about a week before the bloom is going to happen. So if you're wanting to collect orange blossom, you're going to move your bees into the oranges about sometime in April, because the bloom comes on at the end of April, beginning of May, and you want to be there sooner. So the bees are out there looking around, but nothing much is happening yet. And that floral source all of a sudden comes on very, very strong, and the bees fly out. They're going, wow, look what's going on now, and let's go home and tell everybody about it. They come back to the hive. They do their little tap dance. They share the information, via the waggle dance. And then all the other bees will go over and over and over and over again to the orange blossom. So, or citrus, actually. Orange blossom can also be citrus blossom. As the flowers start to fade, a very, very good beekeeper will actually close down the hive, remove the honey supers, then open the hive up again, put other supers on, and the bees can still collect, but it may not be absolutely pure orange blossom. It'll have a little orange blossom, a little chicory, a little of this, a little of that, because as the forage starts to fade, the bees are saying, well, not so great anymore. What else is out there? And they go out looking for it. But what's still inside those supers is absolutely pure orange blossom honey. And that's what a packer like my company wants. It's what the university wants. It's what a lot of small packers want. However, the US has this wonderful rule that you can blend all of these honeys together. And as long as the predominant floral source inside the jar is one single type of honey, you can call it that honey. So in the case that you're looking at the slide, 27% of the honey in the jar can be orange blossom, 25% wildflower, 25% cotton, and 23% alfalfa, and you can call it orange blossom honey because 27% is more than any of the other three. Then you can swap out the orange blossom for the clover, and now you can call that exact same honey clover. Please note this isn't sweet clover, totally different flavor. However, then you go off to meet people who say to you, all honey tastes the same, and now you're looking at the reason. If there's only 27% orange blossom in there, or only 27% clover, it's mostly tasting like the other three honeys that are there. You could even switch out, make the orange blossom if you want to waste it, at 23% and take the alfalfa at 27 and call it alfalfa honey. So there's a lot of manipulation that can happen there that is not necessarily good for sales, let's say, because then you're comparing on the shelf in a supermarket, there's an orange blossom honey that's put together by Dutch Gold that's only 27% or 20% orange blossom, and one that's put together by a small packer in Southern California like Bloom or somebody else, and it's probably naturally about 85% orange blossom. And you're in a sense in competition with each other over something that should be totally different. Now, the other thing, and we'll be doing this in just a second, is that it isn't just the beekeeper that tells you where the honey comes from. Over time, you need to learn what all of the characteristics are for each of these honeys. We started the research at the university, but it's extremely costly. We can't do it all, and I can't get any funding for it yet. I'm going to be trying. There's some new stuff that's come out in the last month that may lead us to be able to do some of this research. But we have to create a gas chromatography program, and we have to create an NMR database and a few other things. NMR stands for nuclear magnetic resonance, and that is actually how they're going to be looking for adulteration in honeys. So one of the other things you need to know is that there are over actually 300 different varieties of honey in the US. Some of them are things you've heard about, and some are things you've never heard about. Some are honeys I've never heard about. Some are honeys that don't exist. And some are surprises. So I had a wonderful surprise last fall when someone was taking a course from Marin, and they brought in their local honey, and they said, you know, I'm not sure what's in this honey, but it really tastes wonderful. And because of what grows all over Marin and the way the bloom was happening, they actually had pure rosemary honey, which is not generally collected much in the US. There is rosemary honey from all over Italy and other places, but it was like a sublime sample. It was amazing. And so you can get a couple surprises like that. However, it's really hard to come across rose honey, and I have a lot of people who tell me they get rose honey because roses, the only roses that produce a nectar that bees can collect are the rugosa roses that are along the roads of America. And there's never enough in bloom at a time to actually create a pure flow for that. And all the roses that you have in your yard are these fancy roses that are all closed up, and they open real slowly, and bees can't get inside there to collect any nectar. So there generally isn't. So this slide just gives you an idea of the different kinds that are available from different places. I know it's not 100% accurate. I know there's many more from different areas. You can see how heavy California is. You'll notice Hawaii has quite a few, and Florida has quite a few. When you get up into the Northeast, it is getting harder and harder to keep all the varietals separate from one from the other. Someone wants me to write for them, and they had their description for their goldenrod honey is light and floral, and I'm saying, goldenrod honey? I said, you're describing knotweed, which knotweed is an invasive plant, just like star thistle is here. Knotweed's taking over all of the Northeast. It's a really floral plant. But goldenrod honey is a fall, very strong honey. It's what I grew up on, and they just had no idea what it was. So you have to be very careful. You want to know what it is. You want to you want to know where you put your bees so you can know what your forage is for your bees, and that's always important. If someone's asking you about your personal one, That's what you're going to need to know is where did you collect that? And every now and then there's something in there that you're going, I have no clue what this is, you know, just so totally different. So we're going to start tasting one honey only. We're going to start with the orange blossom honey. I'm hoping that all of you do have this. This one comes, as I said, from Southern California. The orange blossom, if it's really good, you can get it from Spain, from Italy, from Israel. You can get it from Mexico. Lots of different places will have good orange blossom honey. What does happen is you're going to see, particularly in the US, where orange blossom honey traditionally comes from either Southern California or Florida, what you're going to see in Florida orange blossom is it's going to be quite a bit darker than this one. I'm hoping you can see what I'm holding up. It's going to be quite darker than this one, but its general aroma and flavor will be the same. So this is our first honey to look at. And we're going to now talk about the tools for the taster. You don't get to taste it yet, I'm awfully sorry, but in just a minute. You hopefully have a honey wheel. And the honey wheel, whoops, let's hold that up, right? The honey wheel is not to tell you how a specific honey tastes. It's designed to give you the vocabulary that you're going to use to describe honey. And it helps other people to describe honey. So a lot of people will say to you, oh, honey's sweet. Well, yes, honey is sweet, but honey is not, sweet is not a descriptor for honey. All honey pretty much is sweet, but it doesn't tell you anything. It's too general a term. It's considered a primary taste. And over here on these white ones, you've got salty, sweet, bitter, and what's the other one? Sour. So those are your basic tastes. Everyone can taste that on our tongue. But those aromas and the other flavors, those are hiding up inside our noses. So you need this. You need a profiling form. This helps you keep track of how things do taste. And you can get a whole bunch of these. You want aroma references if you're doing a formal setting. So if you're sitting down with a whole group of people and you're really trying to train them, you want aroma references that have things like a cherry lifesaver, banana peel, or a little banana, or oranges, or a flower, or grass, those kind of things in little cups with lids on them. If you want to have your honeys in a selection of either glass or plastic cups, I've got all of mine are in little glass jars today. And then you want to have plastic or glass tasting spoons. Now people get on my case because I use plastic, and plastic is not an easily renewable source, but it also has no flavor. If you're doing a big honey tasting, like when we do the Honey Festival in Woodland, or when I do picnic day, or when I come to some of the bigger bee clubs and things, I will always bring sticks. And when I tell people that wooden tasting stick is going in their mouth, they have to remember to accommodate the taste of the wood. So you need to talk about that to people, so that you want to make sure they understand that other things are in there besides just the honey. And then the other thing that you need when you're really doing a formal tasting, not necessarily one where you're standing there at a farmer's market and people are just casually tasting honey, but if you're doing a formal one, is you need a consistent tasting technique. I have a sheet here that I use. I think Wendy's going to send out the slides. There's a condensed form of this. But the idea is that if one time you just dip in and taste it, and one time you stir it and you smell it and you do everything, you want to make sure that you do exactly the same thing for every honey you taste. That's the only way that science gets kind of incorporated with the human brain and mind. Remember, we all taste different. So no matter if you're all tasting exactly the same honey, one right after the other, you could all have a completely different experience. everyone's experience is completely valid. But you have to understand that when you pick this up and you taste it, and you taste or smell what you're going to smell, which is orange blossoms and jasmine, someone else may pick it up and it may just be too cloying for them and they don't know how to describe it and they don't like it. Not everybody loves orange blossom honey. Some people do find it too sweet. So you have to listen to what they like and what they say and understand that everybody is different and everybody is right for their own taste buds. So the UC Davis honey wheel, as I said, hopefully you all have one. This was developed using we had 25 people, we had 24 honeys. We tasted over 2 weeks. We had aroma references. We had 60 aroma references. This wheel now has 99 words on it. Every word that's in here was we used sensory profiling forms. Everybody wrote all their words down for what it tasted like, and then we discussed it. We spent a lot of time, several hours each day. And then we listened to every single word and we wrote down every single word, and then we put it all into Excel, and whatever words showed up 2 or more times were taken out. And as I said, we ended up with 99 words that are on here. And at this point, I'd be adding one more primary taste, and that would be umami. And over here in confectionery, I might be adding bubblegum. Now, the other thing I'm going to stress, because if you move around in the world, you're going to meet people from different countries. They have a different tasting experience than we have. What we're used to, they have never ever tasted sometimes. They have no description for it. Marshmallows is one of those things. Bubblegum is another one. These are some flavors that some people nowhere in the world have. And so when you're commonly saying, well, it tastes just like X, Y, or Z, to somebody else it doesn't. If any of you do end up going to Italy, you're going to discover they use a descriptor of ink, that chestnut honey tastes inky. We as Americans are not familiar with liquid ink on a regular basis. We use ballpoint pens, if we even use that anymore. So the concept of ink is very foreign, and those are things that we learn. So taste is what it's all about. What we're going to do is come back to the sensory profiling form. Ideally, if you've got all 3 honeys, you can write the names in them. I started with the orange blossom here. So you can write orange blossom. You might want to write down where it came from. So at some point in your life, you may be comparing orange blossoms, and you want to know what the one in UC Davis tasted like, and you want to know what the one from Florida tasted like, and then you can go back and compare them. We're going to talk a little bit about the color. I don't use the color too much in these environments. Most people don't understand the Fund Color Guide, which I will show you right now. This is a formal color guide. It's used, it's been in use since the 1800s, late 1800s. It's also used for maple syrup. And pretty much it's really used for commercial use. If you were to say to somebody it's water white, it might mean something. They'll think that it's going to taste better if it's light in color, but not everybody likes light colored honeys. So when I talk about honey, color sometimes affects how people think about it. So I don't tend to use it so much. I like to talk about the taste and the aromas. Now, the retronasal aroma is the important one. You've got all these taste buds all over your tongue, but they're really only going after the bitter, the sweet, the salty, and the sour, and the umami. Where you get all those other aromas and flavors are inside your nasal cavity, what's called a retronasal aroma. So after we get the honey in our mouth, we're going to blow it out our nose, goes past our olfactory bulb, and all of a sudden it's going ding, 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 and everything is just shooting all around. We want to know if it's astringent. So astringency is when you, and a lot of honey is, your tongue sort of sticks to the front of your teeth. It's like you had too much tea. And we want to know its texture. Is it viscous or is it crystallized? All of these things appear in the profiling form. So if you're going to take some time, and we won't have time during this particular session to like really go into every single honey, but you're going to want to do that. And then you want to know how long the flavor lasts and what it feels like in your mouth. Some honeys, as I said, are viscous or crystallized. Some are silky. Sometimes the flavor is very, very short, and sometimes it's incredibly long. It just never goes away. Some of the bitter honeys, which none of these are really intriguing, but it all changes. So now we're going to taste this orange blossom honey. We're going to pick up the honey. We're going to warm it with our hands. I've loosened all my lids, I forgot. And we're going to warm it in our hands. If you have honey in a wine glass, you can cup your hand around it. If you have it in a little plastic cup, you can put it right in your hand and warm it. Really just have a little bit on the bottom. But the fact is, we want to get it as warm as we can. Honey doesn't have a lot of volatiles. But one of the things to remember is the inside of a beehive is about 95 degrees and can go up to 125 degrees. So it's warm. When you take the lid off the top of a beehive, you can smell the honey. It's probably the best smell you'll ever have. So we remove the top, we take our little spoon and we stir 3 times, and then we take a little sniff. Now, in the orange blossom honey, ideally the first smell you're going to smell is something very floral, probably like jasmine. It doesn't exactly smell exactly like orange blossoms. It really is a smell that's closer to jasmine. And you wait a little bit, you smell again, you think about it, and then you write down what that smell was. If you want to write down the color, this particular one is in that kind of the extra white or white category. And then we're going to put the stick back in the cup, rotate it again 3 times. Then we're going to take a teeny bit, not as much as is on my spoon right now. And we're going to put it in our mouth. We're going to let it go all around inside. Cover the tongue, the gums, the roof, let it melt. And with your mouth closed, breathe out through your nose. The honey is going to melt, and slowly you're just going to swallow what's left in your mouth. It's really hard not to keep licking it. Now, plastic spoons don't have any flavor, so I like to use them and only taste the honey. The last thing that and I don't have my own copy with me, I forgot, is you can start a honey journal. We actually have put one together. It's got all the information we've talked about, but it also has something, if you look on the bottom, it says hedonic rating. The hedonic rating means how much do you like it. Sometimes you really love a honey, sometimes you really hate a honey, sometimes you're indifferent. You may want to pair it with something. So this orange blossom, I always tell people, and I've now been called to the challenge, the orange blossom honey is really good when you make a cheesecake, because the cream cheese and the honey go together perfectly. Your whole house smells like jasmine and orange blossoms, and it tastes fabulous. So those are all the kinds of things you can do to remember and think about the honey and how to taste it. So at this point, Wendy, this is when I'd like to go into the chat rooms and have everybody, if they have these honeys, to taste them and to discuss it, to use the way we did it, and see if we can get them all into different chat rooms. It says there's about 30 people, so if we put 5 people in a room, that'll give us 6 rooms. Do you think you can make it work?
I'm trying.
Good luck.
Thank you. So basically, I'm going to pause the recording. We'll take 10 minutes in groups, and you may come back to the main room anytime, but you will be notified at 9 minutes that you'll have 60 seconds left in the breakout room. Sound good?
Okay, I'm having, oh shoot.
Welcome back. I hope everybody, for the most part, had an opportunity to taste the honey and had an opportunity to practice the skills that we just learned from Amina. Amina's gonna take us through the savory honey next. What do you have for us?
Yeah, I don't know how many of you actually have honey. That's something that we just were discussing, is that we need to know that in the future. So the coriander honey, as I said, comes from Yuba City. And hopefully if you had some, you were pretty surprised by the flavor if you'd never had it before. Coriander is very, very distinctive. It does occur all over parts of Europe, Romania and Italy and Germany, and it tastes the same everywhere it's grown. Where not all honeys do, but coriander is one that's very, very consistent. I like to talk about it as having flavor that is, well, the aroma is really complex. It's got a little bit of, you can smell a little cumin, some licorice, oh shoot, the Indian spice, not, I just forgot. It's lychee and in Hindi. Throw out a name of an Indian spice.
Garam Marcella, I don't know.
No, that's a blend. That's a blend. Sorry.
Curry.
No, that's also a blend.
Turmeric.
Cumin.
There is cumin.
Fennel.
Turmeric. Well,
Coriander.
great. You're getting a little bit, definitely getting some of the anise type flavors in there, and the star anise, and but it's not sweet in the same way as the orange blossom was sweet. So if you tasted the orange blossom and you know how intensely sweet that was in your mouth, and you taste this and it's not so much. If someone says to you, I don't like honey, it's too sweet, and you happen to have some of this honey, you're going to be very surprised by their reaction. So this honey really smells and tastes a lot like a bazaar, like you've been in the spice bazaar in India or Mexico. It's really quite extraordinary. I was just gonna, if you were to pull out the wheel, you're gonna end up not so much in, when we say spicy, the spicy is not hot spicy, it's spicy like spices. So here's the licorice that you tasted, some of the cloves you may have had, all these kind of things are in there. And and it's a totally unique flavor. It stays on your tongue, it's a little bit astringent, it's quite unique. Particularly good for doing things like barbecuing and stuff. So the wildflower honey, this one comes from Northern California. And wildflower, which is officially now known as multifloral, will reflect the terroir of the region. So for those of you in Southern California, actually, almost all honey in our area, if it comes from the springtime, always has some orange blossom flavor in it. This one does. When the orange blossom is really, really good, like the one we have here, then you sometimes even taste a little bit of orange peel, which is quite unique. But when you open this up, you can smell a blend and it's different. I love doing, when I'm working with a group of people, I like doing wildflower honey because it's not the same flavor every time. It's going to taste totally different. And all of a sudden you're going to hear people throwing flavors out at you that you were going, oh, I didn't taste that. Where'd that come from? And it's just a wonderful, unique experience. So this one is a spring wildflower. It's very light in color, probably because it's got a lot of orange blossom. That's a real natural thing that happens. I had some hand cream on it. It's obliterating the smell here. So this one has a little, I can smell a little bit of floral, a hint of fruitiness. And when you look at the wheel, this whole section is fruity, and yet very, very few honeys actually taste fruity. And very few actually taste floral. You're going to always end up, you're going to find a lot of stuff over here and a little bit of fruit. It's kind of intriguing what happens. So in the spring months, you're going to, here where I live, you're going to get an orange blossom hit in there. You'll get a little bit of sort of a grassy kind of flavor. If you're getting a wildflower from the summer in Northern California, it's going to have star thistle, and star thistle has no seriously distinct flavor. It's very candy-like. So if you're on the coast, you're going to get some sage, and sage is a really mild, silky honey. If you get eucalyptus, depending on the type, because there's only, about 90 producing varieties of eucalyptus. If you get a eucalyptus honey from the Bay Area, the North or South Bay, excuse me, it will not taste like menthol. It will taste a little bit more like butterscotch. So every honey sort of has its own characteristics, and we have to learn what those characteristics are. Oops, over here. Now, you folks all know what your honeybee physiology is, so I'm not going to go over that. But you need to be able to describe something really important to people who think that that honey is bee barf, and you've probably heard that term. I'm sort of grossed out by it. I am. People don't understand that bees have two stomachs. That one stomach is simply for storing honey, and that starts the process of gathering honey. So the gathering of honey, or not gathering, the ripening of honey. So it mixes inside the stomach, the crop with enzymes, and that is the very, very beginning of making honey. I'm going to skip over this because you guys will get the slides, and you're welcome to look at them. You can send the slide deck out separately, Wendy. But the important thing that a lot of people only recently have, or entomologists have even recently learned, is that bees pass the honey back and forth to each other, and that is a lot of the drying. So before it even gets to a cell, it is actually 50% dried by passing it on from one bee to the next and manipulating it in their mandible. It's sort of like, kids play with their bubble gum. It's sort of the same thing. The more air surface there is, the drier the honey will get. And then, of course, when they put the honey in the cell, they don't necessarily squirt it all in there at once. They sort of place it so it's getting more and more air all around it, and then they fan it, and it does, in fact, in a very short time, become honey as opposed to being nectar. So honey is actually the result of getting all the nectar out of it, or all the water out of it, rather, and the enzymes working in it to transform it. They transform this sugar into honey. And so that's kind of what we have to be able to talk about. Okay, let's do the questions real quick and see what happens.
Sure. So Christine has a honeydew question. She said honey that contains honeydew separate between liquid and crystals. But it's not fermenting. Could it be the sugar compositions? And she's showing you a picture right there.
Wait, I don't see the picture.
Describe it. Describe it, Christine.
Oh, you know what? If I put it on gallery view, maybe I can find Christine. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, there. Oh, I see. So it's separated. Is it fermenting on top, Christine?
Nope. I've had this for quite a while now, and it's not fermenting, because when I looked it up, it says the beginning of fermentation. or the honey could be fermenting, but it isn't fermenting.
No, usually when honey's fermenting and it looks like it's an even crystallization, when you say that it's been going on for a long time, has it been going on for 6 months, a year?
I think this was last fall, so a year.
So it's been going for a while. My guess is that it is the result of the glucose fructose ratio, which I'm not sure what the difference is in honeydew. That's not one I'm really familiar with. But the other thing, and are you sure it's honeydew?
Oh yes, it tastes like molasses, and it's very
Well,
and
so do some honeys.
do they?
So
But,
open it
the
up.
the last 3 years we've had a super drought in the fall here. We had like that fire weather where everything was so incredibly dry. We had basically no fall flow, and so the bees were going after anything they could, and so
Right.
we had a lot of honeydew.
So the thing to know also about honeydew is that it tracks on top. You know, like if you take your thing and you go like this, the honey pretty much melts right down into itself. When you've got honeydew, I can't do it because this isn't going to do it. You can take this back and forth and it makes a little thread, and the thread will literally sit on top before it sinks back in.
Well, this one is because I think it's separated. It's super liquid on top.
That's what I'm surprised it didn't.
Yeah.
Does it have that real strong flavor of honeydew?
Yeah.
So there's a couple honeydews that are very mild, but the ones we get out here tend to be oak honeydew, and it's pretty dark, and
Yeah.
does have a very strong flavor, preferred by all over Germany, and people in Europe love it.
Yeah, I think if you mix it, it is pretty dark. I mean, the top is almost black now, and the crystals
Right.
are lighter. But it's very dark. So is it something that you can remix, like maybe heat lightly and remix, or do you know what do you do?
You
with
could warm it. You know, I tell people never to put their honey into a microwave because they don't know how to handle a microwave properly for warming honey. But when I want to warm one, like, you know, when I'm doing if I have 40 people in a course, I can't ensure that all my honey is going to be perfectly liquid for tasting. So I've developed this technique where I put the honey in the microwave. Please don't tell other people this. We always tell people to, you know, put it in boiling water, turn off the oven or turn off the flame, and once it's cooled off a teeny bit, put the jar in and let it sit. And it will do that, but it's really a slow process. So when you have to, as I said, serve a lot of honey, you have to figure out how to maintain it. What I came up with was putting the honey in the microwave under timing it. And this is going to sound crazy, but I time it, if it's a full jar, not this little guy, but if it's a regular jar, I time it for 10 seconds and I put it in at the power level of 5 or lower, but usually about 5 for 10 seconds. And that softens the honey enough for me to be able to get back into it. Then I stir it and it starts to rebind. So you could try that technique. Don't do it too close together, but you can do that a couple times without really seriously damaging the flavor of the honey. Now, in this case, the honey's sort of already kind of wonky, so you may want to just see what happens. But I'd stir it first and see what happens. Just do just put like a spatula in there and have at it.
Yeah, thank you. We've also there's quite a few more questions. So we'll take another 10 minutes and get through as many as we can. And the ones that we don't get through, I will create a Q&A. But a good one here, another from Christine, is, about feeding sugar water. When does that adulterate the honey that we want to make?
Boy, I've been reading a fair amount about this, and I'm not exactly sure, but a couple years ago, sometimes it has to do with when you take the honey off from the bees. So if you're feeding a lot of sugar water to your bees and your bees aren't out there collecting at all, and all they're doing is eating the sugar water, they're just going to store it away. We always think that even if they're storing it, they're still going to fan it and dry it, and it's going to get thick enough to turn into honey. But I have seen honeys that are sealed over in the comb, and it's not happening. And it's pretty clear that the honeys just have too much sugar water in them. This is common out of China in particular, but they have big fanning systems to dry the honey and to try to get the level of water down. But when I was judging, I was doing a honey judging, and I had this cut comb in a plastic container, and it was all liquid. I mean, like, you know, honey has a consistency that I'm used to. This was like syrup. Do you know what I mean? It was so thin. And when you tasted it, there was no flavor. And then we put it through the refractometer, and it was a 24% moisture, which is incredibly high for something that's been sealed over. Now, Melipona honey is never sealed over because they eat their honey in the tropics. They eat the honey so quickly, and there's always stuff in bloom, so they don't have to store it. Our bees need to store it. It was so unusual, but I don't know exactly. I know you can really taste. I can really taste the sugar, you know. So when it's there, I can taste it, but I don't know the time frame on it specifically.
Yeah, that's something to research, which we'll do a bit and see if we can't find an answer for you, Christine. Could you speak a little bit, Amina, to the nutritional benefits of honey over other forms of sugar?
So our body honey is a sugar. That's the first thing you have to understand. This is a sugar. So when people say, oh, it's better for you, there are trace amounts of amino acids and things in here that may be healthier for you. There's a couple things that are now the fact is when they do simple analysis, even for things like diabetes and other stuff, honey comes out pretty much the same as everything else. That's a sugar. So is it better for you? What makes it better for you is that it's less processed. Nothing's been added to it, ideally. And nothing's in there. You can use less of it to get the same level of sweetness. So even though those nutrition facts that I showed you said that you're going to have a tablespoon of honey, most people use about a teaspoon. So you're using much less for the same level of sweetness as sugar. So you're not using as much sugar. In that respect, it's good for you. They're also discovering that inside a little bee's tummy, they have a lot of lactobacillus. And right now the research is going on to discover if that lactobacillus can be operating in your stomach and your body like a probiotic. So there is research on that level going on also. Generally, when we talk about honey and its medicinal effects, there are a lot of people who will say, oh, it's the best thing since sliced bread. Please understand, this honey is not going to cure your allergies. It's not even going to affect your allergies. And if it does, there's a good chance that your allergies stopped a week ago and you just didn't notice. And I don't mean to be sarcastic or nasty about that, but the fact is there's not enough pollen in any honey for you to absorb for what you're allergic to. In addition, if you're sitting there at the farmer's market and you hear someone say, oh, you should always have local pollen honey for your allergies. Well, the fact is what you're allergic to is not what your bees have collected. Your bees are collecting flowers, and you're generally allergic to grass. You know, I'm allergic to goldenrod, which does happen to produce a honey, ragweed and timothy. And ragweed and timothy, which are the most common East Coast allergies, don't produce anything. So it just doesn't, these two things don't come together, besides which the amount of pollen in there is minuscule compared to the amount that you need to actually create some sort of reaction.
Yeah, that's a pretty good answer. Thank you. We've got a compound question here regarding, well, let's think back to the slide you presented about you can call honey orange blossom honey if it's got 27% and everything else is lower, right? So how do you ascertain the percentages, which also leads into how are specific honeys even identified then?
Right. Really good question. So this is a whole course. But the fact is, we rely on the packer to be telling you the truth. And I made that little system up of 27%. The way it reads for the USDA is that it simply has to be the predominant floral source. So you have to rely on the fact that the packer is going to do that. They could have 21% and have a whole bunch of different kinds of honeys blended together below that. And we don't know exactly how much are there, except that they are generally, our larger packers, excuse me, are creating a blend that wants a consistent flavor and a consistent presentation. They don't want crystallization. They want your honey to be absolutely clear, and they want it to taste the same every single time. More and more people have learned that your honey is better off if it hasn't been overheated and overfiltered. At least you're still getting some of the pollen, the enzymes, and a little bit of proteins that are in there. But and it's really very little. But once you've started heating it and manipulating it so it's absolutely clear and blending it, you're just going for one single kind of flavor, and they're going to repeat putting similar honeys together till they get that exact flavor every time.
Got
Does
it.
that make sense? Now, the
Yeah.
other part that they were asking is, how do you know a honey tastes like it? The fact is that using gas chromatography, which is a headspace analyzing a chemical headspace, we can actually analyze all the natural chemicals that appear in orange blossom honey. So we know where the linalool is, and we know, how much of these different things there are. And if it's orange blossom or coriander or this or that, it's going to have a very specific picture after it's run through the system. The same happens with the nuclear magnetic resonance. We can put it through palynology and have our on-campus palynologist look at it, and she can see if she can see certain specific pollen granules within that. So there are ways of doing that, but what's really the easiest one for you guys is to learn what those should taste like. And then you learn, like, I can open up any jar of orange blossom anywhere in the world and know if it's actually orange blossom, because it's got to smell like that. And if
Yeah.
it doesn't smell like that, it's not really orange blossom. And I have bought orange blossom honey that doesn't smell or taste like orange blossom honey. And probably you all have at one point or another.
Yeah, and you just answered Ray's question about honey containing genetic markings of the plant. So there are
Right.
ways that palynologists can go in and identify the pollen, for sure.
Well, the cool thing with NMR eventually is that you can actually also analyze metals and things. Is it metals? They can actually put it into a country. They can, when you see the NMR analysis, they can tell you, oh, this honey did not come from the US. This honey has markers of Argentina, Vietnam,
Yep.
and that.
Yeah, for sure. And we also want to be aware that if we are using any kind of mite treatment at the time that our honey supers are on, especially if it's thymol based, our honey is going to taste like thyme. We must follow the label when we are applying any kind of mite treatment. And as far as I'm aware, one can use formic acid while the honey supers are on. And so we do want to follow the label. And we
Right,
also,
thymol is actually considered a defect. So in Europe,
Interesting.
so if you're over, the only natural defect, the only naturally occurring defect is fermentation. So if your honey is too high in moisture and it ferments, that's the only thing that's natural. All the other things, which are over smoking, too much time, those kinds of things are generally caused by the beekeeping process.
right.
There's people who refuse to smoke their bees at all because, they don't think that the bees, that you should ever smoke your bees. You should just walk up to them and be bee whisperers.
Right. Well, we don't really teach that at the camp, but there are many
No,
ways to
I'm just
keep
letting you know, we
bees.
know those
Yeah.
people are there.
Yeah. What there's another question about finding the best way to find out about what the floral sources are in urban areas. And I think we've got to check in with the master gardeners, and our local bee clubs are usually really great resources for answers such as those. And I also think that Neil Williams's lab has something on that as well. So I will look into that and get back to folks. And finally,
Well, let me add
prophylaxis.
one thing to that, Wendy.
Yeah.
But one thing to add to that is, remember that a lot of the stuff that's out in those in the gardens that are around are not things that bees are going to be. They may get pollen from them, but they may not be getting nectar. And so, you know, your neighbor has a ton of lavender. Yeah, they're going to go after the lavender. Your neighbor has a ton of zinnias. Forget it. You know, just there's not any impact in there.
Right. Right.
California poppy is a really good pollen source, by the way, just no nectar.
Right. And I learned that I didn't know that prophylaxis was part of the image that you gave me about your kids stretching bubble gum, right? That was part of the drying process. I didn't realize that. That's kind of cool. And I also have a comment regarding honeydew. So if you were to get quite crass about just describing honeydew, how would you describe it?
Oh, if we get crass about it. Well,
Yeah.
aphids create it, they excrete it, the ants farm the aphids, and the bees come in and steal all the liquid, as much of that liquid sticky poop as they can, and process that into honey.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to hear it from one of our experts here in the house. And do you find that hummingbird feeders are an issue ever?
You know, it's interesting. A lot of people tell me their bees go to hummingbird feeders. My hummingbird feeder never attracts any honeybees. I get wasps at my hummingbird feeders, but I don't get very many honeybees. So I don't know. And my hummingbird feeder is literally hanging in my arbor, which is home to probably Davis's largest collection of carpenter bees. And I'm not last year, Rachel Vanette's grad students were like collecting carpenter bees out of my arbor. It's crazy how many carpenter bees I have, and I've never seen them on the hummingbird feeders at all. So
interesting.
I don't know. I mean, I've heard about it.
Yeah.
And Wendy, can I interject quickly?
Yes.
I have run across red honey coming from hummingbird feeders from people who are by that sugar with coloring in it.
Yeah.
And again, when you're in a severe dearth, we get calls in our association every year that the bees are going after hummingbird feeders. And our suggestion is to move the feeder on a regular basis, because bees have to re-recruit there and the hummers will find them. And even best—
That's a good idea.
Even best, we say, plant more flowers for hummingbirds to feed them natural foods, which will also be good for the bees. So anyway.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Bob agrees with you. Red dots and honey. Yeah, they've been in it. They've been dipping into some place that they're not supposed to be dipping into. So 2 more questions for you. What kind of honey do I go after if I'm looking for butterscotch flavor?
Where are you located?
Say Marin, the Bay, San Francisco.
If you're in the Bay, you're going to want to try to find some eucalyptus honey. If you're willing to go all the way to Hawaii, Chris Berry has a really good butterscotchy flavor. But in the Bay, most eucalyptus does not taste like menthol at all. It can be kind of really earthy tasting. It can have a little, sometimes depending on the variety, can have a little bit of a dog fur taste sometimes, but that the underlying real flavor is a creme brulee, not creme brulee. It's very butterscotchy, or it can be.
Cool. And tell us, do you have a favorite?
I avoid this question like the um, people always ask me that. I go through stages that, first of all, I like different honey for different purposes. So I have a huge assortment. And I go through stages where I really love one over the other. I always come back to sweet clover. I love cinnamon and sweet clover that comes from the high plains, from the Dakotas. And I always come back to that. I just actually was asked to write a blog for a tea company about honey. And I said, well, as long as you're not going to make me promote your honey, I can do it. And I, instead of telling them my favorite honey, I mean, that's what I need to do, is go let everybody who's reading this blog think that, you know, because I like sweet clover, everyone should go get sweet clover, which is not true. I told them that my favorite experience in tasting honey is that wonderful thing that happens early in the morning when you open up the beehive and it smells so amazing, and you pull out a frame and you take your finger and you go like that, and the honey is warm and the wax just crashes. You know, you don't destroy the whole thing, but there's nothing like that experience. There's just nothing like it. And that's what I told them was my favorite honey.
Well, I think we can all relate. And my salivary glands are acting out right now as I think about that. Yeah, and I too really enjoy Dakota honey. I love that. I love that kind of honey. I also love meadow foam. That's got to be my second favorite.
Meadow foam is the new addiction for a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
That marshmallow flavor is like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And star thistle, and we've got a lot of it around here. I also love star thistle. So
pure star thistle is hard to come by. If you can
yeah.
pure star thistle, please send me a jar. It should be yellow with a hint of green in it.
So what can we find at the Honey and Pollination Center over the next little while? What's going on?
Well, let's see. I'll be doing a tasting interview with Claire and Trevor Towser. That's in the beginning of September. So if people want to hook into that, that's through the RMI. It's a program called Sips and Bites.
Okay.
And I'll be interviewing them and talking to them about all their different experiences in their line of honey. And then October 22nd, I'm doing an online course with Orietta, who is a professional taster, and we'll be kind of doing a condensed version. It'll just be a 5.5-hour course of how to taste honey and crystallization and defects and all other kind of stuff that you need to know. And coming up in the spring, I'll be doing a program on adulteration with the Resnick Center. It's a law program at UCLA that specializes in adulteration.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd be interested in all of that. What about mead? Any offerings?
A mead?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we just finished a course. It was an online one, and that worked. And then the next, we're waiting to hear if the university will allow us to actually do our introduction to mead making course in January. And if we're allowed, we'll be doing it. And if we're not allowed, we won't be doing it.
Okay.
Posted.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you in our Zoom room here at the camp. We've all learned a lot. We're all going away with a sweeter palate and a lot more knowledge regarding how to perform a honey tasting. And we'll practice, we promise.
Yeah, really practice.
Yeah.
And if you have questions, I can, feel free to email me. I think somewhere in here, I think there's my emails on the end of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Take care.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.